to Pharaoh," the Lord commanded Moses. "Tell him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so they can worship me. If you continue to hold them and refuse to let them go, the hand of the Lord will strike all your livestock, your horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats, with a deadly plague. But the Lord will again make a distinction between the livestock of the Israelites and that of the Egyptians. Not a single one of Israel's animals will die. The Lord has already set the time for the plague to begin. He has declared that he will strike the land tomorrow." And the Lord did just as he had said. The next morning, all the livestock of the Egyptians died, but the Israelites didn't lose a single animal. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from a brick kiln, and have Moses toss it into the air while Pharaoh watches. The ashes will spread like fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, causing festering boils to break out on people and animals throughout the land." So they took soot from a brick kiln and went and stood before Pharaoh. As Pharaoh watched, Moses threw the soot into the air, and boils broke out on people and animals alike. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh. Tell him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so they can worship me. If you don't, I will send more plagues on you and your officials and your people. Then you will know that there is no one like me in all the earth. By now I could have lifted my hand and struck you and your people with a plague to wipe you off the face of the earth. But I have spared you for a purpose, to show you my power and to spread my fame throughout the earth. But you still lord it over my people and refuse to let them go. So tomorrow at this time, I will send a hailstorm more devastating than any in all the history of Egypt. Quick, order your livestock and servants to come in from the fields to find shelter. Any person or animal left outside will die when the hail falls." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Lift your hand toward the sky so hail may fall on the people, the livestock, and all the plants throughout the land of Egypt." So Moses lifted his staff toward the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail and lightning flashed toward the earth. The Lord sent a tremendous hailstorm against all the land of Egypt. Never in all the history of Egypt had there been a storm like that, with such devastating hail and continuous lightning. The hail struck down everything in the open field, people, animals, and plants alike. Even the trees were destroyed. The only place without hail was the region of Goshen, where the people of Israel lived. Then Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron. "This time I have sinned," he confessed. "The Lord is the righteous one, and my people and I are wrong. Please beg the Lord to end this terrifying thunder and hail. We've had enough. I will let you go. You don't need to stay any longer." "All right," Moses replied. "As soon as I leave the city, I will lift my hands and pray to the Lord. Then the thunder and hail will stop, and you will know that the earth belongs to the Lord. But I know that you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God." All the flax and barley were ruined by the hail because the barley had formed heads and the flax was budding. But the wheat and the emmer wheat were spared because they had not yet sprouted from the ground. So Moses left Pharaoh's court and went out of the city. When he lifted his hands to the Lord, the thunder and hail stopped, and the downpour ceased. But when Pharaoh saw that the rain, hail, and thunder had stopped, he and his officials sinned again, and Pharaoh again became stubborn. Because his heart was hard, Pharaoh refused to let the people leave, just as the Lord had predicted through Moses.
Okay, so power dynamics. You want to talk about power dynamics? You sent us a pretty intense piece of text to work with for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Straight from the book of Exodus.
It's one that we come back to again and again.
We are talking about the plagues.
Yeah.
But not from the religious angle that you might be used to.
Right.
We're dissecting this thing like a strategic playbook.
Yeah.
We're going to uncover how those plagues weren't just about divine punishment, but like a masterclass in strategy and leverage.
This is a story that's often viewed through a religious lens, as you said. But if you take that lens off for a second, it really lays bare the mechanics of power in such a raw, almost primal way.
Like Game of Thrones, but, with locusts.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a real clash of wills. So for anyone who hasn't cracked open Exodus lately, let's set the stage. We've got Moses. He is going head to head with Pharaoh, demanding that he free the Israelites. And Pharaoh is the ultimate authority in Egypt at this time. But Pharaoh's not really on board with this plan, is he?
No.
Nope.
And that's what leads us to some pretty impactful consequences.
Yeah, you could say that again. So let's talk about those consequences, because they're not just these random acts of chaos, are they? Each plague feels so deliberate.
Yeah, well, and that's, I think, what makes this story so fascinating, right?
Right.
It's because each plague is very strategically chosen to demonstrate God's power, but also to systematically dismantle the foundation of Pharaoh's authority.
So it's like a chess game in a way.
Exactly like a chess game. And what's brilliant about it is that it starts with something that seems so simple, right? The first plague, the devastation of the Egyptian livestock. On the surface, you could say, okay, well, that's rough, but this wasn't just about causing immediate harm. It was about striking at the core of Egypt's economy and the perception of Pharaoh's power.
Because livestock back then, that was everything, right? Wealth, food, security, social standing.
Exactly. And it's really important to remember that the text goes out of its way to emphasize that this wasn't just bad luck or some kind of natural disaster. This is very specifically targeted. Only Egyptian livestock are harmed. And it really showcases this, chilling level of control, right? Imagine you're Pharaoh and you're watching your entire, the livelihood of your people is just being decimated before your very eyes. But right next door, your neighbors are totally untouched. What kind of message does that send? It's very clear. I am in control. I can choose to harm or protect.
Talk about a power move.
Talk about a power move.
Wow. Okay, you'd think that'd be enough to make Pharaoh rethink things a little bit, but no. Nope. He digs in.
Well, and this is the thing about power, right? Is that sometimes it makes us dig in deeper.
It really does.
Even when, it's not necessarily the best course of action. So then we get to the second plague, and this is where I think things get a lot more personal.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about this, because this is the one that always kind of gets me. We're talking about the boils.
Festering boils, painful.
The boils.
Debilitating, and again, very strategically targeted.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. That one always seemed a little harsh to me.
It does. But I think what's really interesting about this particular plague is that if you remember the Egyptian magicians that we talked about earlier who were constantly trying to, undermine Moses, they get hit particularly hard with this plague.
Oh, just did.
It's a very direct attack on Pharaoh's inner circle, his trusted advisors, and by weakening their influence, it starts to sow doubt within the ranks. It further isolates Pharaoh, chipping away at his support system.
And you see that kind of power play, even today.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you think about leaders who surround themselves with yes men, and then all of a sudden their ability to make decisions or make judgments or to even see things clearly, it's totally compromised.
Absolutely. If you only have people around you that are going to agree with you, then how are you going to get accurate information, right? How are you actually going to lead? And so you can only imagine the pressure that Pharaoh is under at this point, right? I mean, his economy is in shambles. His advisors, they're dropping like flies. He's probably covered in boils himself.
Yeah.
This is a leadership crisis.
Yeah. Major leadership crisis.
Yeah.
You'd think he'd get the message, but like you said, power has a way of making people hold on even tighter, which leads us to an even bigger escalation.
Yes.
The hailstorm.
The hailstorm.
Oh my gosh.
And even the way that the text builds up to this plague is masterful, It creates this sense of dread, this very clear warning, and then this just devastating display of raw power.
Like it's a movie. It's like a biblical disaster movie. People running for cover, crops being destroyed, animals.
Chaos.
Total chaos.
Total and utter chaos. Except, of course, for Goshen.
Of course.
Where the Israelites are.
Right, because they're protected.
They are miraculously spared.
Right.
Right. And I think that that's a really important detail here because it's this stark contrast, again, that serves to really drive home God's absolute power, but also this very clear willingness to protect those who are loyal. So even in the midst of all this destruction, there's a glimmer of hope for those who align themselves with the quote-unquote right power structure.
Right. You got to choose the right team. You got to choose the winning team.
Choose wisely, right.
Right.
But I do think that Pharaoh is starting to feel the weight of this message.
Right.
Because after the hailstorm, something really interesting happens. He offers this brief moment of repentance, like this flicker of concession.
He cracks. See, I knew it.
He cracks. But it's fleeting. And I think that that's a really important point here, too, when we're thinking about how power struggles often play out, is that concessions that are made under duress, out of fear, out of desperation, rarely are they genuine. Rarely are they lasting.
Right. So you're saying even after 3 of these crazy plagues, Pharaoh is still not ready to let go?
Not quite.
Okay.
Not quite.
It's like each one of these plagues is chipping away at a different layer of Pharaoh's power,
Yeah.
forcing him to confront something way bigger than himself.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, how the text, it doesn't just tell us about these plagues, but it makes us feel them. There's vivid imagery, the pacing is very dramatic, there's this sense of escalating tension. It's all designed to underscore God's power, but also to highlight just how much Pharaoh is losing control.
It reminds me of that saying, power is like being a lady. If you have to tell people you are, you aren't. And Pharaoh, he's like shouting his authority from the rooftops, but the more plagues there are, the more obvious it becomes that he's not the one really in charge.
That's a great analogy, and it highlights this really crucial point that we've been talking about, which is that true power isn't always about brute force or clinging to control. Pharaoh's power, it was rooted in very earthly things, armies, wealth, with the perceived favor of the gods, but God's power transcended all of that. It was about this mastery over nature, the ability to both protect and destroy. Ultimately, it was about the power to choose not just his own destiny, but the destiny of his people.
Which brings us back to you, dear listener. Because even though this is ancient Egypt, divine intervention, locusts, the whole bit, there are some surprisingly relevant lessons here for us today.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, think about it. We're all navigating power dynamics all the time.
All the time, yeah.
At work, in our relationships, even on a global scale.
Yeah, I mean, whether we realize it or not, we are constantly sending messages. We're leveraging our own strength. We're vying for influence. And just like in Exodus, understanding those different forms of power, both our own and other people's, that's essential if you want to navigate these situations effectively.
It's about recognizing that power can come from some pretty unexpected places.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always your job title. It's not the size of your bank account.
Right.
It's about connecting with people.
Yeah.
Building trust, offering something truly valuable.
And it's about knowing what you bring to the table, but it's also about understanding the limits of your own power, right? Knowing when to push, but also knowing when to yield. Because that clinging to control at all costs, that can be just as destructive for a CEO who's ignoring, market trends as it was for Pharaoh with these plagues.
Okay, so how do we get better at recognizing these dynamics, at playing the game with a little bit more awareness and skill? Like, what can we learn from Pharaoh's, shall we say, missteps?
I think that's where self-awareness comes in. I think before you enter into any negotiation or any kind of challenging conversation, take a moment to really ask yourself, what are my sources of power in this situation? Where are my limitations? And maybe even more importantly, am I willing to consider a different approach if what I'm doing isn't working?
It's like that old saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Sometimes, recognizing the limits of our own power and being open to other people's perspectives, that can be the most powerful move of all.
Totally. And that brings us to, I think, a really fascinating question that this text poses, which is, what if Pharaoh had possessed that self-awareness? What if instead of hardening his heart, he had considered just the possibility that maybe he wasn't the most powerful entity in this whole thing?
It's really putting a new spin on the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right? What if Pharaoh had just taken a step back, looked at things from a different perspective for a minute? Maybe, just maybe, there's a different way to play this whole thing.
Right. And I think it gets to the heart of what we're really talking about when we talk about power. You know? Is it about brute force? Is it about stubbornly refusing to yield? Or is there actually strength in recognizing when you need to adapt, when a different approach might be the smarter move?
Because let's be real, just digging in your heels, clinging to power no matter what, that rarely ends well.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a Pharaoh facing plagues or a CEO who refuses to adapt to a changing market. It's not a good look.
No, it's not a good look at all. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about these ancient texts. When you revisit them with fresh eyes, they're not just these historical accounts. They're these really timeless insights into human nature.
Totally.
The dynamics of power, the consequences of the choices that we make.
So what you're saying is, tucked away in this story about plagues and the stubborn Pharaoh, there's this really powerful lesson about leadership.
Absolutely.
About strategy.
Yeah.
About personal growth even.
Because ultimately, all of us, I don't care who you are, we all face situations where we have a choice. Do we cling to that control even when it's not working? Or do we find a way to adapt, to learn, to choose a different path?
A path that maybe leads to a better outcome.
Exactly.
Even if it means letting go of our ego a little bit.
100%. Letting go of the need to be right, letting go of the need to always be seen as the most powerful person in the room. I mean, that is such a hard thing to do. But sometimes it's the best course of action.
It's so hard.
It is. It is. And that's really, I think, the message to take away from all of this. Because the next time you find yourself in that really challenging situation, and we all do, remember Pharaoh. It might be really tempting to just dig in, to double down on what you think is right. But I'm just going to put this out there. Sometimes the most powerful move that you can make is knowing when to just shift your perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
To consider a different approach.
To recognize that true strength is not just about wielding power. It's about understanding it.
Yes.
Its complexities and maybe even its limitations.
And knowing that there's always more to learn.
Always more to learn. And on that note, we have reached the end of another deep dive. We learned that plays are pretty persuasive. Power dynamics are endlessly fascinating. And sometimes an ancient story can teach us some surprisingly relevant lessons for navigating the challenges that we all face today. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.